Time now for Sports and the Law. Steve Moskowitz is here in studio. All right, we're going to get to the first case right away. According to a Brookings study, the U.S. government has lost $3.7 billion on pro sports stadium subsidies over the past 16 years with very little return. What does this mean? Why should we be bothered by this? Levi Stadium obviously is a publicly funded stadium. Why is this an issue?
It shouldn't be, because different people have different thoughts. They said, oh, you're not making enough money. But if you look at the economic factors, it brings in so much money. And usually it develops areas that, look at us with AT&T Park. Look at that area before the ballpark came in. It brings in taxes from the teams, the players, the sales tax on the beverages, the souvenirs, all the jobs it makes. And when you have these economists doing their figuring, one guy says this, the other guy says, it's like expert witnesses in court. They both say, oh, the opposite is true.
What tax benefits, though, would a team like the 49ers with Levi Stadium get, and how much does it hurt the taxpayer?
The taxpayer is paying in the form of government subsidies for the taxes, but it's also bringing in all kinds of taxes. There's income taxes that come in, sales taxes that come in, and the general economic prosperity where it creates jobs, they bring more people, now more people are buying things, paying sales taxes. That's the economic multiplier that all the economy, or some of the economists look at.
Now the federal government's saying this isn't part of our federal budget, so it's hurting them there.
Again, the problem with these economic forecasting people is they differ so much, just like expert witnesses at trial, because yes, they came out and said, oh, it's not going up enough, whereas other groups come up and say, well, wait a minute, it has brought in a lot of money, and something like that is so difficult to measure. All right,
let's move on to the next case. Charlie Banks, a former financial advisor for Tim Duncan, is facing fraud charges over millions of dollars that he lost. Duncan basically said there were a series of investments over 8 years that enriched Banks, and he lost more than $25 million. Is this an easy case for Duncan to prove?
Nothing is slam dunk, but we have multiple wrongdoing here. We have basically embezzlement where Banks was just stealing money, and then we have him putting into investments that he shouldn't have. He breached his fiduciary duty where he's supposed to be watching out for his client, but he didn't, because he got special additional commissions to bring him in basically the very risky things. Not to mention the fact he brings him only the last page of a contract, says sign here, you don't have to bother reading it, and what he told him was totally different than the contract.
Now Banks committed fraud while he was working with Game Day Entertainment.
Yes.
So who ultimately pays for this, Banks or Game Day?
Everybody in the chain. Everybody gets sued, and Game Day probably has a lot more money than Banks has hidden someplace.
Do you think they go after this guy if it's you or me, or is it because it's Tim Duncan?
Absolutely, because it's a fraud, and the SEC got involved, and there's other people there, too.
All right, our last case, two screenwriters, they filed a lawsuit in December, basically claiming that The Rock and HBO, Mark Wahlberg, ripped off their idea for the hit TV show Ballers. It was quickly dismissed by the judge, and now they're fighting over who pays the attorney fees. Who should pay the attorney fees? HBO wants these two screenwriters to pay for it.
HBO is going to win. What's happened here is the judge threw it out in summary judgment, and what that means is the judge says, you know what? You don't even have enough of a case to go to trial. It's very, very different than Stairway to Heaven, where you went all the way to a jury trial, and that was the band that was opening for him. Here, they made an allegation, the judge threw it out. They're going to wind up owing HBO.
It's really hard to prove when you have an idea. Even if you have, like, they said two producers were privy to some of the information in their pilot or whatever.
Anybody can allege anything,
right.
But as exactly as you said, it's very difficult to prove.
Yeah, and especially if the ideas are so similar, which is what the judge said. They were going to do a different titled off-season based on an NFL's off-season life versus the Ballers thing.
Sure.
Very close.
Again, the big deal here is summary judgment. They didn't even get to go.
Yeah.
Summary judgment means you don't even have a case to present to the jury. They throw you out based on what you put in. You lose based on what you put into the court. That's a real killer. Ow, indeed.
Because HBO, they got a lot of money. I think they
never want to hear your lawyer say ow. You never want to hear that.
That's a bad thing. Steve Moskowitz, we appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.